Right, Catherine, welcome. We finally
Welcome.
we
Okay.
finally managed to get you on, having been
Yes,
trying for about 6 months. So
I know. Well, okay, I hope everyone can see me. Am I sharing my screen? Has that happened?
yes, perfect.
Okay, so the talk today is about the role of the gut microbiome with in mental health, or I quite often use the expression brain health. And I want to overview the latest research on how changing diet can actually help manage mental illnesses. I'm going to share all the references at the end for those who want them. But I just want to start a bit about my motivation, my background. I'm a mental health therapist. I use lots of different modalities. I wrote a public facing book, which has 2 chapters on mental health. But I wanted to do something more tangible and practical for my patients because, like Jen, it's all right. They just actually need some help to change the way that they're eating. So I've developed a simple online program which is now used for a lot of health conditions and all types of eating preferences. And excitingly, it's just about to be trialed in a clinical trial in the NHS for the maintenance phase of a digital remission of sort of establishing healthy eating patterns following weight loss. So I just want to acknowledge that all the science that we're talking about today is appropriate for something like diabetes, but it's also, because it's all about metabolic conditions, it's also low carb and ketogenic is also appropriate in so many different things. Like, for example, diet and dementia. I had a question about that. There's a recent research done, the RECODE protocol, where they reversed 100 cases of dementia, and a large part of that protocol is to do with ketogenic flex. And I've just qualified as a health coach for this, so if anybody wants to talk about it, or maybe we do another talk as Ruth suggested. So hopefully by the end of this talk, although it's predominantly about pathology of mental health, it will, it is appropriate to so many areas of people's health. So let me see, first slide. Great. So what's the gut microbiome? I apologize for those who know what it is, but I think we ought to start with the basics. It consists of trillions of bacteria, virus, and fungi, and mostly there's 2 dominant bacterial species, Firmicutes and Bacteroides. 70 and 20% of the gut microbiome respectively. It's highly diverse though. It contains within those 3 million genes. And if you think the human body only has 20 to 25,000 genes, it's an extraordinary resource. So it's very new, the science, and in recent years, the important role of the gut microbiome in maintaining human health. It regulates the immune system. You see these clever things going in and out. It maintains the intestinal barrier and influences cognition and behavior. And that's just to name a few. Having highly diverse gut microbiome is essential for maintaining human health and homeostasis. And it's been shown that a reduction in microbial diversity and a loss of the beneficial species leads to gut microbiome dysbiosis. And this has been shown in a range of human diseases. So, for example, gastrointestinal disorders, autoimmunity, cancer, and neurodegenerative and psychiatric disorders. So, but for the purposes of this talk, I want to focus on how gut microbiome dysbiosis affects mental health pathology. And I want to show the latest scientific evidence for changing diet and lifestyle and to restore microbiome diversity as, an adjunct treatment for mental illness. Why is it so important? Why do I think it's so important that that this could change our treatment of mental illness? Well, mental health problems are the leading causes of disability worldwide. Over 300 million people have some sort of mental health disability. That's Chevalier 2020. In fact, I won't read out the references. You can go look at them later. And for 15 to 29-year-olds, suicide is the highest cause of death. And finally, there's an increase in prevalence. And that's from the World Health Organization. And it's important to note that we don't know the underlying cause, but it's increasing. So the other reason why it's so important is the options available now, such as taking antidepressants or antipsychotic drugs, there's a low effectiveness and there's negative side effects. Like there was a question that was submitted that I could go back to at the end, which was all about the effect of antidepressants and on the gut. And if you have an antidepressant that affects this, that interrupts in the serotonin in the gut, it will affect the microbiome. The other thing is talking therapies. I do them, but I'm very aware that if you take medication and talking therapies, they're only 22% effective in the long term. So that means that only a quarter of people suffering from anxiety will experience symptomatic relief. And if you think that 1/3 of individuals will suffer from anxiety during their lifetime, everyone's frozen, by the way. Can you hear me? Or have I completely gone? Everyone's just frozen.
No, I can hear you. It's fine.
Okay, all right. I just see everybody's face is frozen. So mainstream therapies don't appear to consider the important role of diets and gut microbiome play in shaping our mental health and other areas. And I think it's important to consider the other things that affect the microbiome, such as exercise, stress, and the fact that mental health is characterized by a set of metabolic disturbances. So impaired glucose metabolism, oxidative stress, inflammation, microbiome dysbiosis. So if mental health disorders are metabolic diseases, I think they deserve a metabolic treatment, which isn't drugs and isn't talking therapies. And this is where the crossover comes with things like conditions like I mentioned, like the dementia, the RICO protocol. And it's this metabolic side of it so obvious. I'll go into detail in the science in a minute. And the program that I developed for my patients was to encourage them to have fresh food with high nutritional value and prebiotics, probiotics. But basically, I was just known as Mrs. No White Food. I mean, that's how simple the intervention became. So before I explain how that works, that intervention, I want to go through the pathology of the biological basis of which diet and the gut microbiome and the influence on mental illness. So this diagram illustrates how the gut and the brain communicate by a little vagus nerve going round and round. They communicate via hormones and they influence immune cells. And all these three forms of communications have been shown to be influenced by the composition of a gut microbiome. So keeping it healthy is really important. And one of the common ways in which bacteria in the gut can influence mental health is through the production of short-chain fatty acids. And these are released by the gut bacteria and can affect mental well-being, influencing the immune and the endocrine system. And in fact, individuals with anxiety and other mental health disorders tend to have a reduced number of short-chain fatty acids producing bacteria in their gut. The other thing I want to highlight with my little, very proud of this, the gut brain is bidirectional. So a recent study showed that negative emotions lead to a change in gut microbiome composition, which then, it's mediated by the release of stress hormones. And people suffering from IBS are more likely to suffer from depression and anxiety compared to the general population. So there's a correlation between it. And particularly as IBS is associated with gut microbiome dysbiosis. That's Chong et al. Okay, so the gut microbiome influences inflammation. So the mental health pathology is that, if you're generating immune responses and inflammation via the production of short-chain fatty acids and other metabolic derivatives, and they in turn activate the immune cells, then there's been a growing appreciation that the role that inflammation plays in mental health. In fact, patients suffering from mental health disorders like anxiety exhibit higher levels of inflammatory markers, and that's been shown they have increased reactivity and secretion of pro-inflammatory cytokines. And these pro-inflammatory cytokines contribute to neurotransmitter imbalances. And so gut microbiome dysbiosis, so an imbalance in the gut, in the stomach, can lead to a reduction in short-chain fatty acid production, which results in increased inflammation. And that could in turn contribute to the pathology of mental illness. And I think this clearly demonstrates the importance of gut microbiome in mediating mental health pathology. So what can we do as healthcare professionals? What influences the gut microbiome, and how can we prevent or restore gut microbiome dysbiosis? The good news is imbalances and changes in gut microbiome are reversible. So it's possible to influence the ratio of beneficial and pathogenic bacteria in order to restore a highly diverse microbiome, thus providing a treatment option, maybe with other things, for mental health disorders. But I think it definitely has to be addressed. So the composition of the microbiome can be influenced by a broad range of factors, which alluded to earlier. Regular exercise has been shown to promote the abundance of the beneficial bacteria Firmicutes, increase bacterial diversity and increase short-chain fatty acids. Other lifestyle choices, such as smoking, have been shown to affect the microbiome, and it can reduce the number of Firmicutes. And our diets have a huge role in the microbiome composition. A recent Nature paper stated that it was a pivotal determinant of gut microbiota community structure and function. And that's because, and it's no surprise, specific nutrients from our food can shape the gut microbiome and promote or inhibit the growth of specific microorganisms. So through diet, lifestyle choices, and exercise, we influence the gut microbiome. And so I'm just going to show you the Reset Your Health approach that I used. It's fresh food, pre and probiotics, and how it could provide a treatment option and complement other treatments by changing the diet to give it more diverse. But this is no different from what you're doing with low carb. We just happen to have personalized meal plans, and you can choose whether you're a vegan. The detail doesn't matter. What's important is it makes the microbiome more diverse. So read low carb, fresh food, pre-pro, full of nutritional value. I was faced, when I was writing this, with specific demands for macronutrients, 20% proteins, 30% carbs, 50% fat, and as a percentage contribution to calories and all that sort of thing. But, that model has been making the population sicker. And I also had demands to remove saturated fat, which Jen alluded to. You know, it's not based on the most recent science. And I think that's a subject for another webinar. That's two. But what was most important to me was the motivation that the individual patients, something they could take action doing, shopping lists, being able to pause to go to the pub, but follow the guidelines. And so it wasn't a diet, it was more a lifestyle change. It's 4 weeks and you can have a look at it online, and it provides exciting and healthy meals. And one of the interesting questions I got, which we could quote it, was iron supplements in the microbiome. Someone asked that question pre the webinar. So if you logged on to Research Health, you could say you needed more iron, because if you try and cope with low iron with people with actually a supplement, excess in iron causes inflammation and a growth of pathogenic bacteria, but food wouldn't. Food high in iron wouldn't. So it's a way of doing it through fresh food. How does it work? We've already said it's low carb, packed with minerals. And it's important that they follow the fresh food approach, which means to avoid refined sugars and heavily processed foods. That was another question we had about sweeteners. Do they kill the microbiome? Well, they definitely affect it and can cause a dysbiosis. But I mean, a lot of people who are listening are converts, so I don't need to go through this. Refined sugars and heavily processed foods, they do contribute to underlying metabolic disturbances. They impair glucose metabolism and increase oxidative stress. More prebiotics and probiotics. The plan provides that high intake to improve the promotion of growth of a highly diverse gut microbiome. And we're a huge advocate of the low carb, or even ketogenic, which have a lower carb and higher fat, for those who are not aware of it, to restore the gut microbiome, as well as overcoming other metabolic disturbances, which are found commonly with people with mental health conditions. I'll come to that in a minute. So, addressing the concerns of the low carb diet. So when I've been developing this thing, I have experienced, and I imagine a lot of you have, that when I was advocating low carb ketogenic diet, sometimes it's a tough sell. So I want to address the most common concerns I've come across, and I'm very happy to share this slide with anyone who wants to use it in their practice. A major misconception is that low carb or ketogenic diets don't provide enough nutrients. And that's not true. They easily contain a large variety of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and low carb diets can provide lots of vitamins and minerals, omega-3, in addition to eating meat and fish if you want to, or you don't want to. It's personal preference. So, and people assume that high fat protein, they won't contain fiber. Well, that's just a misconception. As low carb or ketogenic can have an equally high amount of fiber as carb heavy diets. There's probably more nutrients in the carbs that they are eating because they're vegetable. The second thing was cardiovascular disease. I always sort of got this feedback, you can't do this because it's more fat, and ketogenic diets could make patients more prone to cardiovascular disease. And previously, increases in LDL cholesterol have been reported with ketogenic diets when they were used with neurological diseases and diabetes. However, recent studies have shown ketogenic diets can promote weight loss and sometimes improve hyperlipidemia. And these both reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. And more importantly, the elevated LDL cholesterol is one of the many risk factors for CVD. And other factors include blood pressure, HDL, cholesterol, LDL. So, all of these, it just isn't the case. And one study even showed that when people with type 2 diabetes were on a ketogenic diet for 2 years, overall they had a lower risk of CVD, despite an increased LDL. So this is unlike current mental health medications such as antipsychotics, which are known, they're known to be obesogenics, and they contribute to hyperlipidemia. So overall, there's no current evidence of harm for ketogenic diets leading to CVD. Finally, people are typically concerned about the possibility of putting strain on the kidneys by potentially higher protein content of a low-carb ketogenic diet. But fortunately, a recent study by our very own Dr. Unwin, using clinical data from a primary care setting over 7 years for patients with type 2 diabetes who followed a low-carb diet, showed that despite those patients being more at risk of developing CKD, this study showed that following a low-carb diet improved renal function and actually may reduce the risk of developing chronic kidney disease. So I really hope this slide is useful, and that current evidence shows that these diets do not lead to nutrient deficiency, nor do they lead to risk of cardiovascular or chronic kidney disease. And I'm very happy to share any of that with you if you come across pushback. So I just talked about mental health conditions being a metabolic condition, and there's emerging evidence that low carb, high fat ketogenic diets address this. So impaired glucose metabolism is a dominant feature of neuropsychiatric conditions. Therefore, ketogenic diets can circumvent this problem by favoring fatty acid metabolism. Oxidative stress. People with mental health disorders have increased level of oxidative stress, which results from an imbalance of the ratio of oxidants to antioxidants. Oh, sorry, my phone. Where was I? Okay, ketogenic. So they produce ketogenic diets result in the production of the ketone body, beta hydroxybutyrate, which have shown to reduce the production of reactive oxygen species. And so they minimize oxidative stress. So, ketogenics would help with oxidative stress. Inflammation, as I mentioned earlier, plays an important role in promoting the pathology of mental health. And low-carb ketogenic diets have shown that they exert an anti-inflammatory effect, which results in decreased levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines. And finally, ketogenics have been shown to change gut microbiome function and the gut barrier function. So it all points to the beneficial effects of low carb. So why are we so confident in our approach? It's many case studies and experiments, and they're showing the importance of the gut-brain axis and on the pathology of depression and anxiety. And the both major depressive disorders and anxiety are characterized by brain and peripheral dysfunctions in the body, including dysfunctions of the digestive system. Studies have shown that chronic stress disrupts the balance and composition of the gut microbiota, and you have neurotransmitters, say serotonin, could further contribute to depression and anxiety. And if you get the gut microbiome in balance, then that doesn't happen. There's the evidence, I think probably best if you, rather than me try and make a synopsis of a research paper, clearly highlights the pathological microbiome gut-brain axis that could be present in patients, so that any approach that helps rebalance it would be good. So let's look at the preclinical and clinical evidence. So pre are we looking at? So preclinical. mouse models shows that shown a mechanistic basis for how refined sugars found in processed foods can lead to neuroinflammation. In rats, a ketogenic diet resulted in changes in brain metabolism, which is associated with reduction in anxiety. What's this? The mouse model. Yes, the beta hydroxybutyrate was shown to reduce levels of pro-inflammatory markers in the brain and circulation. So if you've got a healthy microbiome, you're actually producing more beta hydroxybutyrate, and that reduces anxiety and depression. That's a Yasmina. So also then finally in mouse found that fecal transplantation of disrupted microbiome induced depressive-like behavior in previously healthy mice. And these are just a handful of examples of preclinical data supporting the low-carb approach. Clinical trials, human trials, there's been strong preclinical evidence. For example, recent meta-analysis studies that compared 10 clinical trials of 1,300 patients demonstrated that probiotics supplementation significantly improved mood of those with clinical depression. A study with a cohort of over 26,000 patients showed that eating an ultra-processed diet increased the risk of developing depressive symptoms, thus providing support of avoiding processed foods. A 10-year study of following over 82,000 women showed that diets with a higher intake of flavonoids found in fruit and vegetables was associated with lower depression risk. And finally, a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study, which is the ideal, showed that probiotic yogurt reduced symptoms of stress and anxiety. So there are many more published papers demonstrating the importance of the role of the gut microbiome in diet and depression, stress and anxiety. But it's worth noting that in the literature review for this presentation, there were no published human trials on the efficacy of ketogenic diets and specific in relation to those three. But there's strong clinical evidence for other neuropsychiatric disorders such as Alzheimer's. But I just think it's incredibly important just to take a moment here and highlight that ketogenic diets have been treating childhood refractory epilepsy for the past 100 years, illustrating that the safety and the effectiveness of this treatment approach. And so I'm just hoping, I think a lot of you are converts anyway, but it just shows for mental health, the low carb approach, such as the meal plans we do, are a really promising strategy to treat depression, anxiety, and help those, 300 million people. Diets and healthy gut microbiome are very important, and I hope I've demonstrated that the need to incorporate them in mental health therapies, and as so many of the current treatments options are not that effective. I'm really excited about this promising preclinical and clinical evidence, and I'm going to be continually strongly promoting changes in diet when treating my mental health patients. That's it. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Catherine, thank you so much. Just to add on to the, the trial stuff, I had a really interesting podcast, Chris Palmer, American psychiatrist, being interviewed by Brett Sher on the Diet Doctor podcast, talking about how there are some, some really sort of hard-hitting trials underway at the moment, looking into the efficacy of using a sort of low-carb or ketogenic diets in, some really quite severe mental health problems, including schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. And he's got lots of case studies already demonstrating it's been effective in lots of his patients. So watch this space, but thank you for your, yeah, absolutely. Gail, I'm going to hand over to you. Your Wi-Fi hasn't disappeared, or your hotspot.
We've got some questions, Catherine. Are you able to discuss fibre and its role in microbiome? Lots of people, or some people have said fibre is not essential. So we're wondering if fibres, how that works with the microbiome and what your thoughts are on that.
Okay, so I only know from my research and what I've read. If you look at that, remember that arrow that went backwards and forwards, how the gut communicated with the brain, and how essential they are for the four things, the things that you need to be feeding the gut microbiome, and they feed off fiber. And in fact, I've seen that at a conference. I don't know what the long-term effect of would be. And I think you probably need a study of people not eating fibre and what happens to the gut microbiome.
Thank you. How do you measure the microbiome, and how repeatable are the measures?
Okay, so this is if you look at the graph on the research on the microbiome, it's sort of literally gone like that. And I work with a doctor called Dr. Kelka Cooper as an expert in the gut microbiome. And I said, how do I answer this specific question? They're starting to sequence it, to try and understand gut microbiome from a genetic perspective. And the different studies on gut microbiome are highly variable for each disease. So, that actually points more to the fact that you need personalized studies and personalized treatment. So if you've got a dysbiosis, you work out what you've got a dysbiosis in if you want to go to that stage. But also, if you have those two main ones, if they're not there when you have a test, then there's an issue, because we know that they make 70 and 20% up of the gut microbiome.
Tim Spector's got loads of data on this, hasn't he? If anyone wants to go and have a look at his stuff, he's all over YouTube talking about how he measures people's poo samples, including, I think, my father-in-law's, this massive twin study that he's got, which has been really, really fascinating, and has really, demonstrated the links between a poor microbiome and obesity, as well as.
At the moment, there's a lots of information on different profiles of gut microbiota and evidence that link with specific disease states. There's big volumes of testing that prove this. Talk to me, send me, or look at Tim's work. Absolutely.
Back to fibre. Camilla has said there's been talk of a carnivore diet helping with inflammatory bowel disease, which obviously has minimal fibre content. So anyone got any comments on this? And then Joanne McCormack's made a good point. She says fibre can't be essential as the Eskimos did not eat it, and strict carnivores do not eat fibre now. And she's wanting to know if anyone's studying the microbiome of carnivores.
Yeah, I think they should, because this conversation comes up all the time. I know Zoe Harcum, I had a discussion with her about this, and she said, well, when you're eating, you don't eat only meat. Of course, you're eating vegetables as well. So her take on it wasn't that black and white. Because you weren't eating carbs, but white carbs, but you're eating vegetables if you're a carnivore. So I don't know the answer, I think is.
It's interesting, isn't it? Someone's asking if you can explain, please, pre and probiotics.
Okay, so prebiotics are simply fiber. And probiotics are bacteria that you would take in either something like a tablet form or something like, which adds bacteria back into your system. In my book, I talk about the fact, you don't want to be taking them without fat, because they won't go through the acid in your stomach.
Okay, thank you. And Hilary is asking if you recommend any specific pre or probiotic supplements for people, or should we just be getting them from food?
Oh God, you see, I'm so pro food. And should I be promoting something on here?
She didn't actually ask if we should be getting them from food. I asked that. Do you recommend, have you got any you can recommend, like people have a limited diet, I suppose that would be.
Well, before you start shelling out money on probiotics, increase your veg. uptake. I mean, what do I look, it's difficult to recommend. And I'm not a doctor. And, when I'm working with mental health patients, I'm talking about behavior change and getting them to stop eating white food and start eating on a regular basis and not snacking. And, I'm coming from a very different angle.
I have to say, I'm into recommending, things like fermented things like kefir and kombucha and kimchi and those things.
Yeah.
Now, I think for people who I'm worried about the microbiome, I think that might be of benefit.
Yeah.
But I haven't got into the actual sort of tablet form of them. I'm not convinced about those just yet. Who knows?
And they're expensive,
Yeah.
So I'd find it hard to go down that route.
Someone was asking if you're able to give any more information about on diet and dementia prevention and treatment.
Oh, I mean, I'd love to do a whole hour on it. It's so exciting. I really would. Can you still see me?
Yeah.
Hello? You can. Okay, I don't know whether you can see me. I can't see myself, so there you go. Can you see this book I'm holding up? I mean, I've just...
She's vanished.
Oh dear.
She'll be in the waiting room in a minute. There are still some more questions. I wonder if does anyone want to actually unmute
and join in. I don't know much about the microbiome. I occasionally neck a bottle of kefir, and then gobble down some fermented veg because I think it might help. I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. So interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. She's going to reappear any minute now, I think. What a good vegetarian source of protein. Yeah. Oh, hi, Sini. That's such a good question, isn't it? So on the Diet Doctor website, which I've already mentioned because I'm a massive fan, there is a vegetarian section. So if you're strictly vegetarian, that becomes quite difficult, I think, doesn't it? So, there's Catherine in the waiting room. But nuts and seeds, lentils, I think they've got some protein. They've obviously come with a bit of carbs as well, but
eggs,
yeah, absolutely, unless you're vegan. But
Ruth, where did I get to?
You're back. Yay.
Where did I get to? I think I was saying,
you were showing us your book about Alzheimer's.
Yeah, I mean, I'm qualified as a health coach for reversing dementia. It's a thing, it's happening. 100 cases, people, grandmothers are remembering their grandchildren's names, and they're remembering things, and people are going back to work. And I've been 18 months on a protocol watching this happen to families. And actually my book was made out of date. So chapter 10 is all about keeping your marbles. And I talked about the research, but they hadn't got the double blind 100 cases at the time when it was published. So it's out of date for a very good reason, that now they've got proof that the drug companies can't argue with. And the doctor who's done it used to be a research scientist for the drug companies. And it's such a pleasure to work with those medics. And I'd love to do a webinar with Dr. Kelka Cooper, who's one of the doctors I work with, on diet and dementia and low carb. I think it's something that will, people can do in their surgeries to some extent with a simple set of tests. Yeah. Oh yes. Kaz has just asked, is it published? Yeah. It's 100 cases reversed. I will try now to put it in the chat, but no, I'll put it on Telegram. I'll put it on Telegram later.
Yeah, not everybody here is on the Telegram group, Catherine. So
okay, I'll try. Yeah, I'll give it a go.
While you're doing that, Camilla's made a great point. She's put, is there enough nutritional content of food now with the current farming methods? I always wonder that as well. Is the quality of food available good enough? And most people don't have a budget for the organic, wild fish, and it's difficult, isn't it?
I think it's across the spectrum, isn't it? Because if you're just eating white food, then absolutely not, because you're not getting the nutrients. But if you're going down to a market and getting the veg, sure, there's lots of evidence they don't have all the minerals, but it's going to be way better than the SAD diet, the standard American diet.
I'm just wondering whether would Dr. Meza like to unmute and say something, because you put a couple of really interesting points in there. You might want to ask Catherine directly. Might not be possible. Technology.
I'm just looking up for the 100 cases to put it up.
So one of the questions was about red meat. What are your thoughts about consumption of large amounts of red meat on gut health?
Dr.
Okay.
Unmuted and waiting.
What's that?
It's such a massive subject, isn't it? If you, the nutritional value of things like, you know, offal, amazing. But if people don't want to eat it, then Reset Your Health has a vegan option. But we do warn about B12 deficiencies. And we do warn about in vegetarian, you know, if you're menopausal, about making sure you get enough protein. So I think it's a balance. In fact, I'm a mental health therapist. I'm not a climate change activist, or I think it's a massive subject. And again, it's probably not something I'm an expert on.
I came across something interesting, and I was just trying to remember what it was called, but there's something to do with if you have a really good microbiome, then you're better able to tolerate red meat than if you have a poor microbiome. And there's
I've read that
particular enzyme, beginning with CM, is it CMPA or something? I was just trying to see if I could find it.
Yeah, no, I've come across that.
So yeah, interesting, isn't it? How some people seem to be fine with red meat and other people may not be.
Especially if they've been vegan and vegetarian, go back to red meat. That sometimes people do struggle. I did read a paper on that.
Yeah. Did anybody else want to unmute themselves and ask a question?
Is it okay if I say something?
Yes, please do. Hi.
Okay, hi. I'm new to this forum and I'm really excited to be here. I am a psychiatrist working with young people, and I see a lot of young people who are engaging in binge eating, and I am a big fan of making sure that young people are advised regarding the importance of food. I call it one of the basic pillars of health if they want to work with me on anything, whether it is depression, anxiety, or ADHD. I mean, especially a lot of young people with ADHD that I have are engaged in binge eating disorder. And that's a significant issue because of the dopaminergic problems in the brain. And I have had the privilege of coming from a part of the world called India, Kerala, which is really seen as a place of birth of Ayurveda. I don't know whether you heard of Ayurveda, which is a kind of medicine where my grandfather was an Ayurvedic physician. And I do remember him saying that for every illness, he would prescribe a medication as well as a diet. So it's kind of really, this science is almost 2000 years old. And now we are really trying to make sure that we are learning something from the ancient wisdom and really looking at the gut biomes. I also had the privilege of working with Professor Ted Dinan from Cork, who's been doing major studies in the gut biome. And my understanding so far is that I'm doing some research on whether I can use gut biomes, probiotics in adolescent depression. That's an area that I'm doing some research on at the moment. But my understanding so far is that the clinical trials in humans, in clinical populations, has not been done as yet. And that's an area that is still a bit of doubt. And our knowledge of gut biomes is not advanced to say that we can prescribe any particular kind of probiotics with any kind of certainty, because the gut is so different in everybody. And there are multiple variations in making sense of that. So our set of knowledge is still not very advanced, I must say. I'm sorry, I'll stop there.
No, thank you. So Jen has just put in the chat that there's a big overlap with binge eating disorder and sugar addiction. So she's a real pro on that, actually. So it might be worth you having a look into Jen's website. But also, I would say if you haven't already, it might be worth sort of looking up Agnes Aiton and Ali Ibrahim, who are consultant psychiatrists in Oxford, who are helping people with eating disorders. And they're really fascinating. And they've both been interviewed on various podcasts and things. So yeah, so if you wanted to be connected with them, we know them. So we'd be happy to link you up via email if that's helpful. Yeah, and Georgia Eade, she's a psychiatrist in the States who's also making some great progress using dietary approaches as well.
Ruth, I put up the link to the 100 cases, and also someone asked the name of the book, so that's up there. I haven't managed to go through all the questions, but that was 2 I could do.
Brilliant. Thanks, Catherine. Fantastic.
I just wanted to make a point, Ruth.
Hi, Joanne.
Hi. I just wanted to say it's really worthwhile finding polite ways to ask about real food and what people eat. So at the beginning, years ago, sometimes I caused offence by, you know, I don't know, feeling people felt I was maybe judgmental. But I think I gradually learned to ask in a very kindly way, you know, what people actually ate. And an awful lot of people give you this lie, oh, I just eat chicken and fish, and I eat my 5 a day, and I have cereal for breakfast. And, you know, I think, oh, that's just patter, you know, it's not true. But you can't really say that. So, you know, I'm not quite, I use lots of questions. They're very different questions depending on the person who was there, you know. So sometimes it'd be, what do you like eating? Or as a matter of interest, what's your diet like? And I don't mean like, you know, chicken or fish. I mean, like, what's it really like? What sort of stuff do you pick up? And it's amazing the honesty with which people approach it if you don't seem judgmental. Like, I had a woman tell me once that she didn't eat food at all. She hadn't eaten food for months, and she just drank tea with sugar. I mean, that's an amazing admission. And on the point of teenagers and mental health, I'd say that lots and lots of teenagers, lots and lots of people don't eat real food. They eat lots of packety stuff or sweet stuff, you know, like just rubbish. They never ever eat something real. Maybe fruit might be the best thing they eat, and just occasionally. And it's incredible. I had one girl who worked from, I don't know, it was McDonald's or Burger King, but she only ate food from that establishment, let's call it. I don't want to call it a restaurant because I don't think it's proper food. But, you know, she had terrible skin rashes. And you know, like, if you had a cat or a dog, you wouldn't feed them mostly. You would think you ought to give them some real food, wouldn't you? You wouldn't think you just gave them stuff from you know, like, do you know what I mean? Like donuts, you know, like we give our pets better food than we give ourselves sometimes. But I mean, I think just don't assume anything, and just find nice ways to ask people so you get the truth. If you just hear all the time they eat chicken and fish and 5 a day, it just won't be true. So what else? If anything, you know, like, because what if it's a bad day, or what if, you know, what are your problem areas? What do you binge on that you feel you shouldn't have, or whatever? Just find ways to get it out of them. But they do eventually. I used to hear the most amazing things. I had a man who only ate pigeons. He used to catch himself. He used to shoot them, or squirrels it was actually, because he didn't trust supermarket food.
Love that. I love Tom's just put in the chat, and that's exactly what I do as well. I ask them to take me through a typical day, because especially if you say, you know, start off with what's your diet like, a really open question, and then they say really, really healthy, and you're like, great, what does that mean? And often it's very low in protein. It's often just pure carbs and pure processed foods. So Tom and I, we asked them, what's a typical day like? Something I've picked up from Gail over the years is to ask them to bring in a food diary. And that's really helpful. Or I think just David Unwin asked them to take photos of their food. So take a photo of everything you eat in a day. Somebody told me that anyway, which I thought was quite cool.
Yes, he does.
Sorry, somebody was asking who were the psychiatrists. So Agnes Ayton in Oxford, and Ali Ibrahim. I said Oxford, but now I'm doubting myself. Is he Oxford as well, Jen?
Yeah.
He is.
Yeah, he is.
And they're both, I think they're both quite into their research as well, and we're going to get them on at some point. Pratima Singh, she's the other psychiatrist that's really into promoting sort of real food to her patients as well. I think she's London based. Shall I try and write these names in the chat? We'll get them all on, shall we?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Does anybody else want to unmute themselves and say anything?
I don't know where the hand up came from.
Sorry, am I interrupting someone?
Hi, Suzanne.
Hello. Nice to see you. We're all. I think you lightly touched on it. the bit where you were talking about, we were talking about eating disorders and binge eating, and that the microbiome is different in patients with eating disorders. So is it like an egg and chicken situation? Is one the cause of the other? So does the eating disorder cause the dysbiosis, or is it the dysbiosis that is a potential cause of the eating disorder? And then if the patient is then healed, does the dysbiosis sort itself out? Do you have any insight on that, please?
I think Jen might be better to answer this, but I think it's multi-directional. If you've got stress and it's building up, you'll affect the microbiome, and then you have the eating disorder, which means your food intake is compromised.
Jen, are you still there?
I am. Yes, I'm a bit dark. Sorry, that's why I turned my camera off. Yes, I'd agree with that, Catherine, and also this is what Ayrton and Ali say, isn't it? Is that people don't binge on
Nova-4s, yeah.
food. They binge on Nova-4 ultra processed foods. So that's going to mess up with your microbiome. So it probably is a little bit chicken and egg that that each influences the other, but I'd say it does, as Catherine would say, come back to the food really at the end of the day. And if we can get them eating real foods, that's going to address both the addiction side but also the microbiome side, and then that will all sort itself out.
Let's just all close all the big food
Yes.
big food companies.
Let's just
There's
do
she who
that.
worked at Pepsi before, but I won't say that too loudly.
Oh,
Yeah,
Ten
I
Hail
know
Marys.
it's so frustrating because all the marketing and the it's a difficult battle where it's a tide that we're fighting, isn't it? But I think it's important to get this information out there and share it, and each person that we manage to help will go on and help other people hopefully as well. So it's hopefully a sort of a bit of a bottom-up revolution as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked with a student population once and had a student who was, on an IAP scale, he was, very near suicidal. And the intervention I did, which, probably I shouldn't have been doing, I should have been doing other things as well. But I was just said, you have to get up in the morning, you have to walk for half an hour, you can't go to the cake shop. I just noticed someone said the GP was giving a child the cake. And then you have to attend college at lunchtime and no white food then. He came down the IAP scale within about 4 weeks because his diet was really, of course, I have no evidence for that. It's anecdotal. But as Jen said, it's one person at a time. And he was a great advocate for other students.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's really impressive, isn't it? You get this sort of butterfly effect.
Mm.
We've got a couple of people with their hands up. Shall we go to Katie next and then to Richard?
Hi there, thanks very much everyone. Brilliant talk, so really enjoying it. I'm afraid I dropped out quickly, so could you quickly just mention the name of your book, because I can't get into the chat that I had access to before. And my second question was, you mentioned about iron supplements being potentially harmful to the gut microbiome, and obviously we prescribe quite a lot of B vitamins orally now, and folic acid, and obviously lots of people are taking things like magnesium and vitamin K and vitamin D. So I just wondered if you could explain if they are okay with the microbiome, or if there is some evidence that other nutritional supplements could be toxic and are better taken naturally.
So I asked this question of Kelka Cooper, who's a gut expert, and her answer was iron supplements are not a favourite of hers because they feed pathogenic bacteria, and the pathogenic bacteria feed on the iron supplements. So if you can get it through food, that's way better. But a probiotic supplement, if you have to take the iron, could improve iron absorption. Maybe I should send you what she's written, or maybe I'll just put it in the chat because it's quite a detailed answer. I'll do that.
That's so interesting. I did not know that about iron supplements. Wow. Right, Richard, hi.
Oh, hi, yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Catherine, for the talk. Thanks, Ruth
Oh,
and
thank
Gail, for organising it all. It's great. I'm a diabetologist, really. So I just think it's very healthy that there are randomised trials in prospect, because everything's always going to be open to criticism, whether you're pro-vegan or pro-meat or low carb or whatever in terms of diet. If you only do observational studies, because there's so many confounders.
yeah.
The biggest confounders, I think, in this tremendous ill health of around the world with diabetes, vascular disease, cancer, and dementia is obesity. And so if the final common result of what you're eating is that you're overweight, then that's a big factor you have to factor in as one of the confounders, so to speak. And I know that some populations around the world, they don't get a very big BMI, but a more recent thing, which I think is worth thinking about, is a BRI. Have you heard of that? It's the body roundness index. So it's how fat your tummy is, and that works really well for the subcontinent of India and Japan and China, where their BMIs aren't very high, but their diabetes rates are phenomenal. So I think there's lots of things there, and including if you're doing the prospective studies, it's easier to tease out, is the benefit of some dietary change due to what you're adding in or what you're not getting in the control group. So, for example, there are some incredibly vocal people about totally vegan diets, aren't there? And they're zealots about it. And in that circumstance, if you just do observational things, you don't know whether having the vegetables and nuts and beans and everything is doing you good regardless of what else you eat, or it's because you're excluding, say, meat and fish, that's doing you good. So there's always processed carbs. There's always going to be massive controversy. I suppose the one thing to hold on to that I think we'd all agree is that over processed, high energy dense foods and highly absorbed, like Catherine saying, white foods, are pretty much the bad things and should be excluded. And that's a good place to start.
I mean, one of the things I get, and Dr. Unwin actually gave a really good example the other day. 150 grams of rice, boiled rice, has the same effect as, was it 14 teaspoons of 4 grams of sugar, has the same effect on your blood sugar. And is it 10? Yeah, I mean, that's so helpful, because people say, well, I can't eat rice, and I've always eaten rice, and those infographics of sugar with my mental health patients, so not with diabetes, with mental health, have been really useful.
And the Freestyle Libre is still available for a 2-week free trial, isn't it? If anyone's interested in that. So it's meant for people with type 2 diabetes, but I'm pretty sure they don't check. So or you could self-fund it. But yeah, I mean, that's a really useful way of sort of working that out, that actually, rice massively raises blood sugar. And I saw that sucralose, I saw an interesting continuous glucose meter printout of Tim Spector's actually, and he'd only ingested sucralose in a black tea or coffee or whatever it was, and his blood sugar massively went up, and he put that down to that was the mechanism was through the microbiome.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions I got was, do sweeteners kill the microbiome? I mean, there's different types, but they affect the large bowel and increase the number of bifidobacteria, and that provokes diarrhea. But more than that, they affect the sweet taste receptors, and they alter the brain's response.
Yeah.
So it's not whether they kill the microbiome or not. It's the gut-brain conversation.
Yeah. And it's the emulsifiers and the preservatives, all those things as well, that are really sort of deleterious to the microbiome as well, isn't it?
Yeah, the food additives, long term, that has been studied. Emulsifiers alter gut bacteria.
Yeah.
And studies have shown they cause chronic inflammatory conditions, colitis. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of research on the food additives effect.
Asfia's put a good point. She said, does food addiction, should this be categorized as an eating disorder? I don't know what people think about that. And she's also written,
yes,
when advising diet, it's tricky, isn't it? Is there a danger of triggering an eating disorder? It is tricky. You know, can we be too restrictive and people start fearing other food? So yeah, interesting.
Oh, but I mean, what's complicated about fresh food?
No.
What's complicated about fresh food minus the white? There's nothing complicated about that. I this whole triggering thing, because I've come across that, you know, you can't say that, you can't say this. Fresh food with vegetables that got more nutrients, that's got to be better than some of the things that people are doing.
Absolutely, and particularly for the binge eating disorders and the bulimia, you know, you're going to be, you know, more satiated by eating a bit of more fat and a bit more protein, less carbs, aren't you? So less likely to overeat. I did hear Chris Palmer on that podcast I mentioned earlier mentioning about he worries about people who've got anorexia nervosa adopting a ketogenic or a low carb approach, because once they then start to exclude another food group, because they're often so worried about eating fat, they become increasingly malnourished. So it's I was really kind of, well, yes, that sounds really important, and so you know, if those patients do choose to do it, then they need to do it, you know, with some really careful sort of supervision. And actually there are case studies where it has been really beneficial for people with anorexia, but yeah, probably best for them to do it with some really careful support.
And I probably wouldn't use the expression with patients of low carb. I would just say fresh food with more nutrients.
Yeah.
Ruth, a few people have asked to join the Telegram group. What's the best way to do this? Is it to email you?
Yeah, email. So lowcarbhcp@gmail.com. You'll all have that address because I sent it out with the Zoom links. So if you can email that address, David Oliver and I admin that address. So David Oliver is the GP from the Freshwell amazing, awesome duo who are producing all sorts of apps and things at the moment. So email David, ideally from an NHS account. So the Telegram group is really for health professionals. You know, it's doctors and nurses mainly, but there's dietitians and health coaches and social prescribers on there as well. So anyone who's really keen to be involved and sort of share resources and support each other, that's what it's for.
Thank you.
I should have said at the beginning, you probably noticed as you joined the meeting, this is actually being recorded. And so what I normally do is I upload it as an unlisted video, and anyone that asks to see it, I share the link with them. But obviously some of you have asked questions. So if any of you who have asked questions don't want to be available and don't want to be visible, let me know and I can chop out the question and answer bit and just have Catherine's presentation. I presume you're happy for it to be shared, are you, Catherine?
Yeah, that's fine.
So yeah, so please let me know if there's a problem with that. Don't have the email address. Sorry. Okay, so I'll put it in the chat. So lowcarbhcp@gmail.com. Thanks, Richard. Nice to see you both. Lovely. Right. So has anyone got any other questions? So it's been really amazing, Catherine. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed that. And thank you to Jen. Jen's clapping you. Thank you to Gail. Thank you to Gail's dog for behaving itself this time.